So I gotta tell you all, how many of you are on Instagram? Anyone on Instagram? You could be bold. Say, I'm on Instagram. Go to E.Louise Williams, or Larson, E.Louise Larson, and just follow her. She's an incredible power lifter. We've been talking about that in the back. It's something to see. So anyway, I just want to mention that. That's a kind of neat thing. You all have neat things about you. But we've been talking about, the broad dimensions of how to get the economic equation, inclusion equation right, and really beneath that, it's how to create healthy communities that are sustainable in the long run. And all three of you are accomplished. You've done great things. But I just want to ask you point blank. I'm going to start with you. Who did you have to beat to get to where you are? Who did you have to knock out? What did you have to get over to succeed? Because we're talking a little too positively. I want to know who and what we have to get out of the way to win on this topic.
Yeah, so a little background about myself. I actually am not a native of Pittsburgh. I'm from Baltimore City, and I came to Pittsburgh for a PhD at Carnegie Mellon in the Tupper School of Business. So as I was progressing in my research, one of the things that I was dealing with was my mom, who had Parkinson's disease for about 25 years.
Right.
She's since passed on, but she had difficulty with her posture and balance, and I couldn't find a device to help her. So I ended up on this entrepreneurial path pretty much to help my mom.
Right.
And during that process, I had people who felt as if I should be in sort of the academic box, or this is where you should be charting your career.
And what does that mean, academic box?
Becoming a tenured professor and being an educator. And so for me, the challenge was sort of breaking out of that mold and sort of saying, hey, I have an interest in something that could actually help people in their quality of life. So that's one. So then I get to this entrepreneurial space and I look around, and quite frankly, much like the room here, it's not at all diverse.
Right.
Right? And so I'm coming into events and meetings and talking about what I'm doing, and people seem interested, but almost like, why are you here? Right? And so it was this sort of underlying, nothing too in your face and direct, but that's sort of, I think, where the best attacks are. Very under the radar, sort of, oh, that's nice, that's really interesting, and shifting the conversation. So for me, my focus has been on building my company. In addition to building it, talking to other Black women, Black men about entrepreneurship and about how to pivot their ideas into actual companies and growing in this region. And
just to be clear, your company, AbiliLife, helps in relation to what you were able to do with your mother to create things to enhance posture, position, a lot of different dimensions.
Right.
And just before I jump to Louise, given your experience and your candor, which I'm grateful for, what do you think, for other people following, seeing what you've done, would help make that an easier path, or better path?
So for people of diversity, and that's what we're talking about here, I think one of the things that we need to really take a step back at is we're talking about industry today. I understand that's sort of what we're supposedly speaking about, but you cannot separate people's lives into compartments. And I think that's what our society typically drives us to do. When you look at the city of Pittsburgh, and when you look at incidences of just lack of inclusion, of discrimination in housing, violence. We had, not too far from here, a young man this past summer, Antoine Rose, get shot and killed. When you have that in the community, and then you ask me to say, well, how can people of color come and be more entrepreneurial and engage in corporate? Well, first of all, we need to have secure housing. We need to make sure that we are actually welcome in spaces. We need to make sure that our lives and our safety are guaranteed before we can go and create and be entrepreneurial. So instead of just sort of separating and sort of, this is, work, Courtney, and this is personal Courtney and this is family Courtney. That's not the case. So I think looking at the entire system is incredibly important.
Louise and Afshan, let me ask you the same question. What have you folks had to overcome? You create one of the great makerspaces, and you've basically invested and are part of the Innovation Works, which I understand has a huge portfolio of investments and success. But just in terms of, again, accomplished women who are in part some of the answer to what we're trying to look at today, what are the dimensions of that? Who have you had to knock off? Sorry, I'm obsessed with who you had to knock off.
Yeah, that's a difficult question for me to answer because I really try to focus on where I'm supported as an individual, and I do feel really supported also not being from Pittsburgh.
Right.
But I just want to echo everything that Courtney said. Like, money and security for people who need it most are the ways in which we can knock off people who have the most power,
right,
in order to provide a more equitable platform for folks to have access to education, housing, security, and then participate in a diverse economy and innovation.
So tell us a little bit about Prototype. Is it PGH? Or is it just Prototype, your makerspace, and how you've made that accessible to those that haven't been part of the current, if you will, in there? Tell us a little bit what it's like, and also tell us about Open Swim.
Oh, yeah. So Prototype is an organization whose mission is to provide gender and racial equity in the Pittsburgh entrepreneurial sector, and we do that by providing a space that's accessible in price. So we're on a sliding scale of $15 to $50 a month, but if that's a barrier, we don't want to prohibit that for being a reason why anyone can't come to our space. Our space. And we also have tools and education to support the ability of an individual to learn how to work with the material world. And our classes are sort of a holistic approach to what it means to learn to be in this world. So it's not just building literacy around tools, but it's also building financial literacy. And we've also worked with other folks to have classes on mental and physical health. Someday maybe we'll do a powerlifting class. And the last thing is that we provide a network of support. So we work with organizations all across the city to find space or make space to have conversations about what we can do to help make Pittsburgh more equitable, and also partner with organizations to give them a platform to teach whatever they're experts in.
And do you follow people? Are you able to look at and kind of log successes so that folks have come through what you've done and they've gone off to create a company or worked within a company or innovated somewhere, so that you're able to kind of brag a little bit about what your place has achieved?
Yes, and we would like to do that more. We started in January 2017, so the effects of what we're doing are still being developed and sorted. There's one woman in particular who, she dropped out of architecture school, and she's a Chinese American woman and didn't feel very supported in the field that she was pursuing. And she was looking to get more access to tools in the art space to continue to pursue her career as a working artist in Pittsburgh. And by coming to our space and learning how to work with CNC tools, she actually was able to not only how to learn to work with those tools, but ended up getting a job actually making boxies, which are made locally here. So she ended up working for Boxy after coming to our space and learning how to work with those tools and meeting people who sort of helped make that connection.
Cool. And Afshan, Innovation Works, my understanding is, there's nobody bigger than you now as an investor in Pittsburgh. I mean, you guys are so big. You're the executive in residence. How are you moving the needle on essentially gender and racial diversity issues?
Well,
or are you? Maybe you're not.
We are, Steve.
Yeah.
We
okay.
are. But I think in thinking about it, we as an organization, one of the top active seed stage investors in the country, have to look internally, and then we have a right and responsibility as we work in the community and the region to walk the walk and talk the talk. So internally, we've looked across our spaces in terms of the types of individuals that we employ and the types of individuals that we engage with, and try to look at gender balance and diversity and inclusion. We've recently created a set of guidelines where in our efforts internally in our events, we have gender-based and racially based inclusion for panel discussions like the one I'm on here with my dear friends here. We look at having diversity and inclusion as part of every panel that we participate in. And then externally, we walk the walk and talk the talk. And I think, in honesty, you mentioned this earlier, that a lot of companies and organizations and the community is waking up to the fact that this is not just something we have to give lip service to. This has to be something that we actually believe in and move forward. So we are focused on increasing our efforts to reach out to minority founders and entrepreneurs. We have invested more than 50% of the companies that we've invested in the last 20 years have either a minority or a woman founder or a woman founder. And recently we've made some great initiatives with the Forbes Fund and the Homewood Children's Village, as well as our Startable program, to engage more folks, both tech-based and non-tech-based, to invest in them, to build trust with them, and to help them compete.
You know, we were talking in the green room a little bit about some of the things that had been discussed earlier in the stage. And when we had the CEO of Siemens here, she said that sometimes our own identity, sometimes the conversation we have with ourselves is a barrier to succeeding. And I asked you about your family, which is, you know, your parents immigrated from India, and they've been entrepreneurs in, you know, food and construction, and they're kind of serial. And I'm just interested in what your experience is as a woman among entrepreneurs, what that kind of conversation and expectations of you, how that's different than maybe your colleagues here in the panel. What can we learn from what you grew up in, from what others might? Because I think what we're trying to do today is find out what can be replicated, what ought to have echo effect from these conversations.
That's a great question, Steve.
Thank you.
Well, I'm a first-generation American. My parents emigrated, as you said, from India, and I think the immigration question is front and center in our world today. And you made an interesting observation that the number of startups started are declining. We have a great, rich nation of immigrants. As a person who was born a lot earlier than these two folks here. We lived in a world that women had limited choices, but what we learned in terms of immigration and family structure is that you really should pursue your dreams, especially in terms of entrepreneurship. And I was encouraged to pursue anything that I was interested in. Back then, I think family support was a huge factor, and now all of these organizations and folks coming together to give support is helping push the needle forward.
Courtney, let me ask you the same question, like what, you know, how you see that question. We did this I mean, I'm empathize with Baltimore. The great article by Olga Kazan in the Atlantic recently about trailing a woman who had some health issues, just an incredibly bright light in Baltimore, but living beneath the poverty level, and how everything was sort of stacked up, health services, social services, and, you know, she was trying to make it all work, and just how the system was there. But, you know, this was an incredible person. We had her on stage about 3 months ago as we did this piece. But I am interested in this area of again, expectations, and what do you think we can get out of this in terms of our responsibilities, but our own expectations within family, community. Courtney?
Yeah, I mean, I think expectations always start externally. If you talk to a 3-year-old, they believe that they can jump up high enough to reach the moon.
Right.
And they truly believe that, right? It's only when they get older that we have teachers, parents, things in the media that are telling them, no, you can't. Or you can, but only this way. So I think what needs to happen is having open-minded communities, particularly around our young children, to give them access to all sorts of opportunities. and not sort of steering them. And I think I don't know that it always comes from a negative place. I think that as adults, we want to make sure that our children are safe and happy and moving in the right direction. But I think when you sort of stunt that growth by saying, this is the path that I know because trust me, I've walked it and I don't want you to get hurt, you are limiting the fact that you're raising a new generation that's going to have new challenges and new opportunities, and that while you are older, you have not walked the path that they will walk.
Right.
So sort of providing that wisdom, but stepping aside and allowing that openness and growth to...
Now, you're embedded in Pittsburgh now. You're staying.
I'm here, yeah.
You're here. And I know you talked about safe streets and security and dimensions. What would be 2 or 3 other things you think Pittsburgh needs to deliver on to make this a more equitable and inclusive place?
Yeah, I think a couple things that are important are, I feel like there's a lot of Pittsburgh that's negotiated and talked about in spaces where people don't have access to. So for instance, this event is happening right in the middle of the work morning. So there are people who simply cannot come to this event even though they want to. I spoke with some of my friends on Facebook this morning and said, I just can't come here. I don't think there's childcare here. There's actually an IW portfolio company called Flexible where they offer childcare at events like this, and it's not here. So what about the people who have children that would like to come and want to have a voice but can't? So that's important, being more transparent about what's actually transpiring in Pittsburgh. And then I think that having large organizations and corporations that have the leverage, that have the resources to truly go in and when they say supplier diversity, really, really mean that. Meaning, don't wait for everybody to come downtown to you. Come to Braddock, come to East Liberty, and really understand where your suppliers are and how you can best support them. I think those would be fantastic for Pittsburgh to implement. That's
terrific. And Louise, thank you both. That's terrific. And just, both of you quickly, you work with feminists, and I love that you said feminists of any gender, but to try, what are the, when you bring women together and do this, and I'm just sort of interested in what you would do to sort of open that pipeline more, and I use the word pipeline as, almost reluctantly because I don't, I'm told how awful a word that is by folks in it, but nonetheless, the channel of folks, what can we do to increase the prospect for women that are going through both of your channels?
Yeah. Well, I think that finding a starting point is so hard. To Courtney's point, investing in security in order to have young people see a diverse future is important because there are a certain group of people who are imagining what the potential futures of Pittsburgh look like.
Right.
So we need to make sure that there are more people who can accurately participate to that conversation. And I don't think it's just stopping with youth, but also looking at who is leading the companies, who is leading the companies in Pittsburgh. So how do we hold those companies accountable to look at women in leadership locally? If 24 of the Fortune 500 companies are female CEOs, what kind of example does that set to our leadership in the business community in Pittsburgh, and also politically? Where'd Sarah go? Hi, Sarah. We have some wonderful women who are politicians who are also leading the charge to get involved locally in politics. So
that's great. Afshan?
So we have to recognize that the country is becoming a very diverse place, and the startups of today are trying to address needs in that diverse community. So let's start with the fact that these startups themselves are going to have a different perspective. One of the things we've done at Innovation Works is to understand that from a technology perspective, a founder, a woman or a minority, doesn't necessarily need to be a tech whiz in order to start a business, and we are supporting efforts to find more and more diverse founders.
Well, great. Well, let me go to all of you. Questions, answers, comments. We have got microphones over here on the side. Got to be some question or comment. How about our politician in the front here? Since she called you out, we might, and I know that you always have a comment. Yeah, go ahead. And tell us who you are, because I'm in the dark on this one.
Hi, I'm Sarah Namarato. I will be joining the State House come January. I'll be one of the state-level bureaucrats. So this panel, but this event specifically, has me thinking about the public and private sector and the relationship there, and how we've gotten so far away from recognizing that a strong public sector is necessary to build a strong private sector. And when you have a budget that prioritizes tax breaks and subsidies to the largest corporations among us, you lose out on all of these other investments in people that actually make a place great, like our public transport, our public education systems, investment in affordable housing in our neighborhoods.
Right.
And so that's really kind of where my space is. I don't know specifically what question is percolating from that, but just kind of understanding that there is more creativity and innovation that can be employed in that sector, and we don't just have to kind of take the programs that exist. And I think that, you know, both of you who are up there are kind of showing that you can think creatively and that there's more of that spirit necessary, and that elected officials and also leaders of corporations should be looking on how we invest in that space to really create a more solid foundation that can build on the equity conversation that we're having here today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate and congratulations on what you're doing. You know, there's a new book out there, and I don't know the exact title of it, but I think it's called The Rise of the Mid-City, and it's been looking at the population shift from America's biggest cities and the mid-sized cities like the Dallases and the Oklahoma cities and the Des Moines. They're growing at different levels. A guy named Mick Cornett, who was a former mayor of Oklahoma City, did this really wacky thing. Oklahoma City was being recognized as one of the fastest growing economies, lots of startups, but it was also being recognized as one of the most obese cities in the country. And Mick considered himself obese as well, the mayor, and he got 47,000 people to work online together, and they collectively lost 1 million pounds in weight as a city. That led them to then get more involved in civic engagement. It began to create more infrastructure spending on walkability, and it comes into as an example when you talk about that intersection between public and private sector. Maybe it's a slightly different thing of, just as we wrap up here, do you guys think there are bank shots out there in terms of thinking about the ecosystem and working with the public sector better than we're doing today? And maybe the Oklahoma City model is not the right one, but I'm just interested in what are the cool bank shots we may not be on our radar screen, like something like that we ought to begin imagining that we're not today.
I'll jump in there. Innovation Works held its first diversity lunch over a weekend with Flexible as babysitting services. And we engaged a whole lot of organizations like the City of Pittsburgh Innovation Department and the African American Chamber of Commerce, and a whole lot of voices and folks who felt welcomed and supported, and we plan to do more of that.
That's great. Louise?
Yeah, I think looking at examples that we have in our community, like the diversity lunches, like our representatives in politics, and also more cross-collaboration. So we just launched a City as Our Makerspace program where we're looking at partnering with organizations like A Peace of Mind in Wilkinsburg, Flower House, Black Unicorn Collective, and building cohorts to support women, particularly women of color, as they move into entrepreneurial pursuits, and then allowing them to come back and mentor other folks who are interested in to be aspiring entrepreneurs.
That's terrific. Courtney, last word.
Yeah, I'd love to have like an open house of some of our city buildings and offices, as well as private sector offices. I think that so many people that are underrepresented have no idea what any of these organizations do at all. And they also have no idea that a lot of them are actually mandated to advocate for them. So I'd love to have an open house where we have maybe a week or so where each organization allows people to come in, ask questions, and get feedback. So I think that would be definitely doable. All
good ideas. Thank you all. Courtney Williamson, CEO of AbiliLife. E.Louise Larson, co-founder and creative director of Prototype PGH and an amazing power lifter. Be sure to check her out on Instagram. And Afshan Khan, executive residence Innovation Works. Thank you so much for a great conversation.